I've said when talking about post-traumatic stress, I've said this many times, definitions are helpful, but they're only helpful if they serve as a bridge to healing. Sometimes I think we can take a clinical definition, and you started with that. We can take a clinical definition and it ends up putting people on islands where either my identity is now someone who has PTSD because I fit within the very specific DSM-5 clinical definition, or it puts them on another island where they won't get help because, well, I don't fit that definition. I didn't have those things happen to me, but I'm living in a place of great anxiety, maybe even overwhelm and panic. I need help, but whatever I'm dealing with is not tied to what a clinician would say is trauma. And so that definition is not helpful. If anything, it's divided me and us. You worked at the VA for a while, and you work with a lot of veterans now. And I think for a lot of veterans, the diagnosis clinically of post-traumatic stress disorder, it becomes a badge of honor in a weird way. And then it becomes their identity, and it's a really strange thing, but it also then prevents them from getting the healing and the help that they need because they now identify with that definition instead of seeing it as something that the Bible has answers to.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It definitely becomes an identity, and that identity becomes a problem for a few reasons. One, anytime we mess with our identity and where we find our true identity, we're going to have problems. And that's not limited to PTSD. People find their identity in all kinds of things. Actually, IBCD, the Institute for Biblical Counseling and Discipleship, 2 years ago had a whole conference on identity, and like every workout was like workshop was, I am this, I'm a label, I am an academic, I am a whatever. And anytime we put our identity outside of who I am in Christ and what God says about me, we screw things up.
Right.
With post-traumatic stress, that obviously becomes a problem. But with the disorder, and this is one of the reasons we like to take that D out of disorder, is it communicates to somebody, this is a medical condition that's happened to me that there is no cure for. That's what the VA will tell you, right? And we see that through the crapshoot of experimental things they've done with people to figure out how to help. And they're trying to help, right? The VA is trying to do a good job, but they don't have the primary piece, the faith piece that's missing. So they're throwing drugs, they're throwing all kinds of therapies, equine therapy, yoga, everything you can into this mix. But what they've told veterans is this is it, like you're stuck. So there's the identity, and it becomes a badge of honor. It becomes a shield that they can use to protect themselves from other people, to push people away, to actually push away the counsel and help that they could get. But it also that diagnosis without a cure steals hope from them. And I teach a class on counseling post-traumatic stress, and one of the things that I help people understand is, yes, there are physiological changes, but even secular researchers have identified that those changes in the brain can be reversed through talk therapy. And I sent some of your instructors an article that points to that reality, because we want to show people, no, you're not stuck. This is not something that you can't grow through and overcome and actually be made better because of. So yeah, the identity piece is huge. And that's why taking that D off says, I'm not disordered, I'm not broken, I'm not a freak, I'm not messed up. I've been through a really significant suffering. It has affected my life, but it doesn't determine who I am. It doesn't change everything about my life. And it actually can be a tool for my good and God's glory.
Why is it that some people respond one way to traumatic incidents and others respond very differently to those things? What's the mechanism there? And I think the question then leads to, how do we become resilient against trauma that inevitably will come into our lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trillion-dollar question that researchers have been trying to figure out for decades now, trying to figure out, why is it that if you and I walk into a situation, it's going to impact you differently than me? And there are a lot of what are called pre-traumatic factors that influence somebody, whether or not they're going to develop these types of symptoms. And they can range everything from women have a tendency to respond worse than men, to if you had early childhood trauma, if you've experienced as a child, you're probably more likely to develop these things than somebody else. So if you have one guy who was abused as a kid and another guy who wasn't, they both see the same combat theater. One is more likely to develop PTSD than the other. When you stop and think about that, some of that is largely because of the responses they learn to deal with suffering at that time. You've heard the testimonies at Mighty Oaks at the Legacy Program, guys whose families are migrant farmers. They're single mom going from farm to farm to farm, and as soon as she gets into a relationship, that guy starts abusing her. They hang in there. They start abusing the kids. She moves up in the night and moves. Well, that type of situation is not going to equip that child with good mechanisms and proper responses to deal with that suffering. So when they face suffering as an adult, they're going to revert to what they learned before. They don't have that. The most significant factor, which you won't see in the literature, is their faith, their relationship with God. What they believe about God and what they believe God believes about them are actually hugely significant issues. So the testimony, there's a book called The Chosen Few that documents a particular unit in the Army that went through the Battle of Lynott. A mutual friend of ours was there. And there's a testimony in that book by their captain, Captain Meyer, who says that he almost lost his faith because of what he saw in that battle. But what he realized was that the pre-traumatic factor that influenced was that he had a bad theology. He had a theology that said, if I'm a Christian, if I love God and I do all the right things, I'll be safe and my men will be safe. God will protect us and get us home. Well, he thought he was doing that kind of life, living that kind of life. He had a particular soldier in his unit that was a Christian, and that soldier died in that battle. And he said, I'm done. I'm done with faith. The problem was not that he had faith. The problem was that his theology was wrong. He didn't have a theology of suffering that included the types of things that he would encounter in life, the types of things that the scriptures do speak to and actually promise we will face suffering in this world. And God doesn't promise us an easy road. But if you go into a situation believing that God promises you an easy road, and then you die or hurt, or you see other people die, something's got to give. Either your perception of reality or this faith. And oftentimes that's the faith is what gets jettisoned. Thankfully, in his case, he came across a great book by Johnny Erickson Tata that really taught him true biblical theology of suffering, and helped him understand that God allows things that he hates in order to accomplish what he loves, and it helped preserve his faith. So